Alrighty guys, so we talked last week in the previous episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod about the early box office projections for opening weekend for Captain America Brave New World. And so, just to kind of add on to that picture now, we have some more data that I think is interesting enough to talk about here. But I almost see it in a similar way to what we talked about last week with Captain America Brave New World's box office projections, in that I think you can read whatever narrative you want in this. And I think that really the big determining factors as to whether or not Captain America Brave New World will be a box office success won't be determined until after the film comes out. But we'll talk about it in just a second. So the pre-sale tickets have been live, and I said last week I got my tickets for opening weekend, and they've been live for about a couple weeks as of the release of this podcast. Now we have some data now, and it looks like, according to the data, the film, and I'm reading an article here from a website called Game Rant. I'd never heard of it before, but reading an article here, and they say Captain America Brave New World is it's ahead of films such as Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and the Marvels, which is good. That's a good thing. It's also ahead of Joker Folie à Deux, which is an interesting comparison, other than just being in the conversation for comic book movies. And it is lagging behind obviously bigger films like Deadpool and Wolverine. It's also ahead of other MCU films such as Eternals and Black Widow. Although, caveat there, those two films were coming out right at the tail end of the big first wave of the pandemic, so I don't know. Is that the most reasonable comparison? Maybe, maybe not. And it's also ahead of a film like Dune Part 2. Maybe a little more relevant, right? I mean, sure, it's not the exact same demographic. Like, the Venn diagram there is not, a complete circle, but it's there's a bit of overlap. And Dune Part 2 made $714 million. So it's interesting, right? Because, again, I think we can read a lot of things into these pre-ticket sales, but here's the thing. Right? Because, yeah, sure. So we can look at it and say, okay, so there isn't as much excitement for Captain America Brave New World as there is with Deadpool and Wolverine, but maybe there's a little more excitement here than, compared to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and the Marvels. To which I say, yeah, isn't that kind of obvious? I think if this film, all things being equal, like, let's say these films were coming out at the peak of the MCU, I still think, like, let's just say the year is 2017. And the three films coming out that year are Captain America Brave New World, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and the Marvels. Given, how, let's just take the peak of the MCU, like coming off of Civil War, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man Homecoming, etc. I don't think it's a surprise to say that Captain America Brave New World is outpacing those films, right? I think that makes sense. The other films that they're listing here, like, it's outpacing Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which, again, another pandemic film. Like, of course, it's going to outpace every single pandemic film in 2021, other than Spider-Man No Way Home, because that was just a behemoth, right? And it's outpacing Captain America: The First Avenger and Thor, which, again, those are Phase 1 movies that didn't make a whole lot of money comparatively, although they made some money, right? I think in the range of $300 to $500 million is somewhere where those two films landed, right? But again, I think the bottom line is this, and this article also cites the fact that Captain America Brave New World will be boosted for sure by the President's Day weekend. And actually, it's a pretty strategic window for them as well, because not only is it President's Day weekend, which means that the Monday will be off for most people working and at school, which is a big plus, but also the Friday that it comes out is Valentine's Day. And I don't know how many couples are going out there. I'm sure there are statistics and data that will tell you an exact answer, or at least give an approximation about how many couples going to go to the movies for their date night or whatever. I can't imagine it's a whole lot of people, to be honest, because, I mean, watching a movie is a very quiet event for people. I'm not here to discuss, the psychology of what couples do on Valentine's Day, but all to say, it's not zero, right? I'm sure that there are couples who are very excited and they're going to use that chance to celebrate and go watch a movie. And if the movie's Captain America Brave New World, great. It's also, though, opening against Paddington in Peru, which I don't think will be nearly as big as Captain America Brave New World, obviously. But, Paddington in Peru might be a more fun, cutesy kind of movie that might appeal to people more. So who knows? But it can't hurt. I certainly don't think it can hurt. Here's what it comes down to, though, in my mind. And this is such a Captain Obvious thing to say, but I'm going to say it because I genuinely do believe this. All of this stuff, all of these, the talks about momentum and whatnot, because sure, Captain America Brave New World certainly seems like it has a ceiling, right? It's not going to make as much money as a Deadpool film coming off of two incredibly successful Deadpool films and coming off of Hugh Jackman returning as Wolverine and coming into the MCU. It doesn't have the ceiling that Deadpool and Wolverine does. It doesn't have the ceiling that, Avengers Doomsday does. Even if the MCU is not in a good state or whatever, an Avengers film has a much higher ceiling than any Captain America film does. Maybe except for Captain America Civil War, for example. But it comes down to this. It comes down to, is the film good? And I know that is such an obvious thing to say, right? Because duh, if a film is good, then a film is good and it's probably going to make more money. Not always the case though. And I think that with a film like this, that's unproven, right? Because while I think that there are some people in pockets of the internet and pockets of, the world that are like, no, I'm never going to see a movie, with another person as Captain America. Some more malicious than others, right? Some just can't stand the idea of a black man as Captain America, and obviously that's a much more, malicious and harmful way to look at it. But also I think there are just people out there who are just like, yeah, well, Steve Rogers is Captain America to me, and I'm just not going to watch this movie. Again, I think that is, obviously the first, the former opinion is crazy and it's hateful and it's wrong. But the second one, I think everyone should give the movie a chance, right? If they're willing to watch a Captain America film. I understand that, it's hard to unsee Steve Rogers as Captain America. So there is that. And so, honestly, if the film is received well, because there are unknowns, Sam Wilson being Captain America, MCU kind of being at a precarious point, Red Hulk, what's that all about? But if the movie is good, and if people are generally saying, like, I'm not even saying 95% Rotten Tomatoes, I'm like 75, 80%, and people are like, hey, this is back to Marvel, it's fun, it's really fun, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking or anything like that, I think people will go. I think if the word of mouth is, this is definitely something, if you have a weekend free, go check it out, it's fun, then I think people will go, right? If the word of mouth is, it's okay, I think the film is not. I honestly, if that is the word of mouth, I think the film's not going to do well at all. I think if it's like 50 to 60% even, I think people are just going to be like, yeah, Marvel, not as great as it used to be, and people are just not going to go. But I think that if the film comes out swinging, right, and again, by swinging, I don't mean perfect. I'm not saying it has to be Paddington 1 and 2 levels of Rotten Tomato scores and Metacritic scores and cinema scores and whatnot. I'm just saying if the film removes the review embargo and everyone's like, really good time, I think people are going to go. The 4-day weekend, the MCU factor, I think people are curious. I think people will go. And I think that this is a film that stands to honestly have longer legs than most other MCU films just based on the word of mouth. So we'll see about that. I think the pre-sale tickets, yeah, it's an interesting insight, sure. And it's landing it in the same place as the early box office opening weekend projections were as well. But I think, again, I'm more curious about, we're going to definitely cover this in the next couple weeks if it's not the same week as the film coming out itself, because that would be kind of redundant. I'll try to do my review then. But if the review embargo lives, at least a week before the film comes out, then we'll definitely cover that on the channel, because that's what I'm most curious about, is what are the reviews saying, what are the reactions. But we'll talk about that when that happens. Guys, what do you think about the pre-sale tickets? It's fine. It's kind of in that same range of, better than most Phase 1 films and kind of, better than most in fact, almost all of the pandemic films that the MCU did, but still kind of lagging behind the big event films. Let me know in the comments down below.